Yeah, Katie, well, my colleague Jake Trailer and I talked to a number of people inside of the White House who were part of this cadre of concerned staffers who had noticed that Natalie had resisted declining to complete the security clearance process like the rest of these White House staffers, and that she only in recent months had filled out forms to launch a formal federal background investigation and ultimately received clearance. We were not able to get to the bottom of exactly why she resisted going through the clearance process for such a long period of time. And that is obviously a very big and important question that has yet to be answered. Why did she resist this? Was it for a reason of her not wanting someone to find out something about her past? But I think that this incident in general is sort of reflective of the broader concerns that some of these staffers and people outside of the White House now, too, former Trump administration staffers have about Natalie Harp's presence and the worst impulses that it brings out of the president. It's a sort of reflection of this idea and a broader pattern of the way that Trump treats a lot of processes and security safeguards that are in place, from everything from security clearances to ethics processes, and Trump's disregard for those things, not viewing them as a security safeguard, but rather as a political lever that can be pulled whenever he or someone like Harp wants it to. But at the end of the day, the president did ultimately intervene to ensure that Natalie went through with the security clearance process, because, again, this is someone who does control a lot of the information flowing in and out of the president's hands, the human print machine, as Maggie Haberman has pointed out, whether or not she is someone who is sitting in the Situation Room in highly classified briefings, at least last year when she did not have a clearance, is also a question that hasn't been answered. But it is highly likely that someone with such close proximity to the president would have access to sensitive information.
So when I went to Donald Trump's trial here in New York City, the Alvin Bragg trial, Natalie Harp was there sitting right behind him, and she was carrying a stack of papers, which, were a number of articles that Donald Trump might want to read, some more favorable coverage. She was following him in and out of the courtroom whenever he walked in or left. She was very close at that time. When we're talking about the human printer, what exactly can we say that she is printing out? Are they articles from, I don't know, like favorable news outlets? Is it tweets? Is it polling? What sort of stuff is she handing to him, Jackie?
This is a great question, Katie, and it definitely goes beyond the classification issue. I think that if she had a security clearance and was providing the president with information that was classified or sensitive coming from the NSC, there might be less concern from White House staffers. But a large part of the pattern of Natalie's job and something that has gotten the president into trouble in the past is amplifying disinformation and unverified information, conspiracy theories, information from the worst corners of the internet, far-right extremists. This did not make it off the cutting room floor. But Natalie also has been known to provide the president with inflammatory and controversial tweets. The president has gotten into trouble before for retweeting things that Natalie has brought to his attention. She is someone who does not necessarily discern or have a filter for the information that she is providing to the president, hence the concern about sort of being a binky or someone who caters to his worst impulses and is providing him with information that would sort of fall in line with whatever confirmation bias he has that day or of what conspiratorial alleyway he has gone down.
What he needs to hear, hence the term security blanket or binky. In talking about the clearance, she's gotten it now. What does it say to you, Michael, or what concerns do you have about her not having it up until recently?
I'll be frank, I'm a little bit disconcerted how quickly she was able to get it, because in order to get a top secret, potentially secure, compartmentalized information clearance, you normally have to go through a process and an interview and a background check that takes at least 6 months under ordinary circumstances. So I am wondering how this was able to get done in such an expedited fashion while still following the normal processes. Because it's not the sort of thing, the president can't snap his fingers and all of a sudden the 30 or 4 dozen individuals that need to be interviewed about Ms. Harp's background are interviewed. These things take time. There's travel involved. Conversations often last hours. They need to be written up. Then they need to be evaluated by people who actually make the clearance determination. Everything we're seeing about this strikes me as not very above board. And we should note, this was an issue in Trump 1 as well. There were a number of individuals, people with whom he was close before he became president, who seemed to have trouble with the clearance process. And whether it was because they didn't want to submit things or they submitted improper documentation or forgot major parts of their past, the president ultimately just granted them a clearance, which is something he as the president is allowed to do. So I don't know why they're going through this whole rigmarole of talking about the process in a manner of compressed time, which would normally be impossible, when he just has the power to grant it to her if he wants to do so.
Yeah, which is what he did ultimately with Jared Kushner the first time around. Her brother was on CNN, Michael, and he said that she has and has had for quite a while an unhealthy obsession with Donald Trump. If you're going in a background check and you're trying to get someone a security clearance, would you do an interview with the brother, and would that raise a flag?
You could. A lot of times immediate family members are actually bypassed simply because there's an assumption that they're going to say something favorable that might not stand up to close scrutiny. And if you go a little bit farther out, you'll get more of an objective opinion. But in cases like this, where some of the behavior of the individual is just so strange, you would probably want to talk with as many people as humanly possible. I mean, look, I spent my high school years listening to The Cure and the Smiths, and I never wrote a MASH note as creepy or deranged as the ones she did. This begs for a thorough investigation as to her access, her background, her influence, and quite frankly, her stability.
McKay, on the way that I concluded the open, there's a lot of outrage right now from Trump allies, Trump White House, about Jon Ossoff insinuating that they might be having an affair. How dare Jon Ossoff do that? How dare the senator smear Natalie Harp's reputation? That's beneath, beneath what a public figure should do, and it's so unfair. I wonder, is it fair to raise the question of whether that is a better front page headline, better way to describe this relationship? Is it easier to write it off and dismiss it within voters' minds than saying, no, this person is just, writing him fawning notes and leaving him around the office and always by his side? Because that just, in the way that Maggie Haberman described it, the security blanket aspect of it is just kind of harder to explain, especially with Donald Trump getting up there in age and having a harder time remaining coherent lately?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think part of what makes the indignation from the kind of set of Republicans who are crying foul over what Jon Ossoff said a little hard to take is, I mean, two things. One is that, Donald Trump is not exactly a paragon of fidelity and morality in his own personal life. I think he's actually himself bragged about that over the years. The other thing is that a lot of the people who are most alarmed about the relationship between Trump and Natalie Harp are people in Trump's own White House, right? They are people in Trump's orbit who, even they who, judging by history and the reporting that's out there, probably had to ostentatiously perform their adoration and submission to him to get into his inner circle. Even by their standards, they think the way that Natalie Harp is acting is strange, and they're worried about it. And I don't want to. I want to be very careful about making any kind of allegation or insinuation about what the nature of their relationship is. What I will say is that it is incredibly, bizarre, and the people in who are invested in the success of the Trump administration, the Trump White House, the people who want Trump to be a successful president, they are the ones that are most worried about this relationship. That should probably tell you something about how bad it's gotten.
What about Republicans in Congress? You hearing anything from them, McKay?
Well, the one thing I will say that has come up in conversations in general from Republicans about this is that everybody who looks at Trump's inner circle and has some kind of familiarity with it will tell you that there are multiple ways to get there, right? You can do it through the traditional means, like you can work hard to advance his legislative and policy goals. You can notch wins for him. You can go on TV and defend him. You can also shower him with flattery and adoration. And Natalie Harp seems to be pretty good at that. But one of the best ways to really get on Trump's good side, to get close to him, is to be the person who delivers him the good news, who delivers him affirmation for his worldview, who some would argue keeps him kind of ensconced in his bubble, right? And Natalie Harp appears to be world historically good at that, right? She has positioned herself as the preeminent, Trump whisperer by basically routinely telling him that what he wants to hear. And so when I talk to Republicans about, how people like Natalie Harp get into Trump's inner circle, they will say it's actually not that uncommon. She's just gone much further than almost anybody else that we know about.